What's up, everyone? In this video, we're going to explore the local API in PayloadCMS. But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications for each time I release a new video about PayloadCMS and more. Now, let's dive in. Payload's local API gives you the ability to interact with your database directly from your server. You have the same operations available to you using the local API as you would have in REST or GraphQL APIs. But since you're doing this on your server, you're not dealing with any server latency or network speed issues. The real power of the local API is in server-side contexts, even outside of React. You don't need to request data from third-party using HTTP, so you're able to cut down on latency and loading time on your server-rendered pages. With PayloadCMS's local API, you're also able to interact with your database from within your access control and hooks. This allows you to use and transform data from your admin dashboard. You can learn more about hooks in my videos about payload hooks in the playlist linked in the description. To access your local API within hooks, you can use the req argument for hooks that provide it. For example, you can go to your after change hook, which will go here in our posts, and then find our after change hook. And then we have our req object right there. And we'll use the req object to initialize a new const that we'll call posts. And we will await our req.payload.find. And this opens up our local API. In the find method, you can add a collection and we can call in posts from there. Accessing payload through your hooks is a powerful way to interact with your database on your backend and adds an extra layer of functionality to your admin dashboard. But what if you want to query your database on the front end? Well, you can do this by importing getPayload and the config from payload. So first, we actually need to create a new front end directory. And then we're just going to add a new file that we're going to call page.tsx. And now here we're going to import get payload from payload and then import our config from @payload config. Now, in order to get payload up and running, we're going to create a new const called payload and set it equal to await get payload with the config object in there. You're then able to interact with your database by creating a new const. Again, we'll call posts. And we can then await payload.find and then set our collection to posts. There are a few ways you can interact with your local API using different operations. We've already mentioned payload find. That's what we set up for our hooks and for our front end. And this is used to return all documents from a provided collection. Other collection operations include create, which enables you to create a new document for a specified collection using data you provide. So if we were to create post, we could await payload.create, and then we would add collection posts, and then we would need to provide some amount of data as well. So this comes in handy if you have a form or other way to gather data on the front end and send it to the back end to create either a post, say for like social media or something like that. Aside from finding all documents, you can also find documents by ID using find by ID. And so we'll do find by ID by just setting const post by ID and set that equal to await payload find by ID. And then we'll need to provide what collection we want to find by, and then the ID, which is a string provided by PayloadCMS. This allows you to return just one document by its ID. You can return an object of total docs by using payload.count. So if we wanted to see how many posts we have, we could do number of posts and do await payload.count and set our collection to posts, and this would return how many posts are available. You can use payload.update to update one document by providing an ID or many documents by omitting the ID option. So we can come down here and do const update all posts equals await payload update and just do collection posts, or we can const update by ID and do await payload dot update and do collection posts and then provide an ID. Either way, both of these need to have a data object provided. Aside from data, if you're going to update all posts, you are going to need to include a where query in order to filter that down. Similar to payload.update, you can delete one document by providing an ID or many documents by omitting the ID option. So if we were to do const delete post, we could await payload delete and provide a collection of posts. We would need to include a where query as well. But if we do const delete post by ID, we could do a collection posts and then provide an ID, which then will delete the post by that ID. Globals have their own operations separate from collections. You can either find or update globals by using find global or update global. So we'll do find global here, and we can do await payload find global and provide the slug of the global. So we could do header there. And then for const update global, we would be able to update the global here by providing, again, the slug, which we will say header, and then providing a data object in order to know what to update there. The local API will automatically infer your generated types that you've created in your config file, which you have seen my IDE trying to do type hints as I've been typing. That means as you set your collection or global slugs, other parts of the operation you're calling will be properly typed. For example, when we set our collection to posts, if we want to create a new post, we'll see the data option property typed as post. So if we go up to our create post, we can then see what fields we have available. And this is just for anything with the letter T in it. There are also local API operations for auth-enabled collections, but we won't cover those here. Interacting with the local API is no different on the front end than it is on the back end through hooks. You have the same options available to you on both sides, so we'll go through each of these in turn. The first option available to you is one that we've already mentioned, collection. The collection option is required for all collection operations and is not available on global operations. Next is data, which is required for all create and update operations. You'll use this option to specify which data should be added or updated within a collection or global. It must be in the same shape as your config in order for this to work, of course. If any field is required in your collection config, it must be included in your create or update operation. Depth is the next option available to you. We have not done this one yet. So here under collections in our find, we can add a depth, which expects a number. And so typically a depth of 1 is going to be enough, but if you don't anticipate using any relationships, you should set this to 0. And so this tells payload how deep into relationships it should return. By default, if you have your depth set to 0, a relationship is only going to return its ID. So you won't be able to render that on the front end without setting your depth to a level or 2 higher. Localization allows you to manage data in multiple languages. This is a major feature of PayloadCMS, and so you're provided with a locale option to specify which locale you'd like returned. You can specify the locale you want to query by adding the locale option and assigning it to the string value of the requested locale. While you can manage multiple locales, this option needs to be a single string, not an array of strings. If you have localization enabled and don't specify a locale, you'll be given your default locale as a result. You can set a fallback locale to change this behavior to your desired fallback locale. I don't have localization enabled, so I'm going to be getting errors there, so we'll move on from there. By default, payload will return all fields for a given collection or global. If you want to reduce the amount of data you're sending and potentially increase the speed of your operation, you can use the select option to request only specific fields from your collections or globals. This is similar to how you can specify what you want returned in a GraphQL query. You can set this by adding the select option and then opening an empty object. From here, you can specify which fields you want to return, including fields nested within groups or arrays. So we'll just return the slug and set that to true. Want to return hidden fields? These are typically hidden in accordance to your config, but you can return hidden documents by setting show hidden fields to true. You can use the populate option to override any default populate settings you created in your collection. Since default populate limits what a collection is allowed to send, you'll need to use populate to specify any additional fields you'd like to send from your collection. What you put here overrides default populate completely, so be sure to include all the fields you'd like to populate in the populate object in your local API query. So in order to use populate, you'll type in populate, then you'll find your collection that you'd like to use the populate function on, and then you can find any field here that you want to return, which we'll set slug to true. Override access allows your local API to bypass access controls. This is set to true by default to allow your front end to access everything it needs to. If you don't want this behavior, you'll need to set override access to false. We're just going to leave it as true, but you can see the option there. Setting override access to false allows you to pass a user in to use against access control checks. So again, we're going to leave override access as true. Override lock allows you to enforce that document locks are not ignored, which is the default behavior. If you want to enforce that no operations can occur when the document is locked by another user, you'll need to set override lock to false. And so that's not available in find, but if we come down here to update, we'll see override lock there. So this will allow any updates that we make to a document to override any locking done by another user in that document. By setting pagination to false, you can return all documents instead of querying for document counts. You also have access to context, disable errors, and disable transaction, which we won't cover here, but it's available in create, delete, and update operations. Some options are available only on specific operations. For example, sort is available to you in your find operations. By default, these are going to sort ascending, but if you include a minus sign before the field that you want to sort on, it'll now sort by descending. File and file path are also available to you in create functions and update functions, so you can create and update media as well. When performing a find operation, any of your join fields will be returned as well, so you'll be able to access those relationships on the front end or in a hook. If you know you won't need a join field to be provided on the front end, you can set joins to false to preserve resources when querying your documents. So we don't have any joins on our posts, but we do on our users. So we will set our users to find all of our users, and then we're going to set joins to be false. So now no join will be returned. We can also open this up as an empty object and find our post by user join field and set this to false. If we had multiple join fields, we could go through each by their field slug name and set them to false if we don't want to return them. If we do, we have the option to limit how many documents we want to return, which expects a number. Then we can sort by the field we'd like to order these by. And then we can even use a where query to filter our join field even further. While Payload is built using Next.js, you're still able to use the local API outside of Next.js. You can use whatever framework you want to use with PayloadCMS. All of Payload's official packages are ESM, so if you want to use Payload in any project, you'll need to make sure that they are in the ESM format or are dynamically importing Payload's config. You, of course, can also use the REST or GraphQL API to query your database independent of the Payload local API. But initializing Payload in your framework of choice can have several of the same benefits as using Payload with Next.js. The local API is a powerful way to communicate with your database. It allows you to reduce the resources necessary to query your database, gives you type hints in your IDE, and gives you flexibility in how you return data and what data is returned. PayloadCMS gives you the freedom and the ability to use their local API both inside and outside Next.js. If you found this video helpful, please like the content and share it with others who might also find it useful. Drop questions and suggestions in the comments too. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to check and make sure you're subscribed and enrolled in notifications so you never miss a video I release about PayloadCMS. I'll see you on the next one.